Eagles Entertainment.
Eagle Eye in the Sky is fueled by Gatorade, the official sports drink of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Anything that move, I don't care who it is. Let's go. Give me everything you got. Play fast, play hard. Let's meet these boys tonight in their house. It's party time. It's party time. Here we go. Touchdown!
You're listening to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. Now here's your host, Fran Duffy.
That's right on the weekend. We're talking about hybrid players today as the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade, continues. I'm Fran Duffy, and as always, I think we've got a great show for you here on episode number 320. At the top of this week's show, we've got our scouting report where I chat with Ben Fennell about positionless players on defense and really kind of focusing in on those hybrid linebacker safeties because they're all the rage now, right? Every year in the NFL draft, we're talking about these players and how they can do so many different things on defense. They can play in the box, they can play in the slot, they can play deep. We talk about these guys every single year. Last year, Isaiah Simmons, he went in the top 10 to the Arizona Cardinals. A little bit of a slow start this year, and everybody's written about that. People have talked about that. So what about a couple guys that went in round 2? Ben and I are going to talk about Kyle Duggar from the Patriots, Jeremy Chinn from the Panthers, two players that were viewed in similar ways as Isaiah Simmons a year ago. What were they asked to do for their respective teams? Ben and I watched some tape. We'll share our thoughts right at the top of the show. Before we get there, though, a couple of things I want to make sure we hit on. Number one, I'm going to ask you guys again, head on over to our Apple Podcast page. Throw us your support. Throw us a rating, throw us a comment. If you've got a question, if you've got a request, something that you want Ben and I to break down, players or a scheme, if you've got a specific question about the game overall, and I can bring on a guest to talk about your specific question, now's the time. Jump on Apple Podcasts, leave a rating, leave it in the comment section, and we will hit on it here in a future episode. Also, if you enjoy my chats here with Ben every single week here on this show, make sure you go subscribe to the Journey to the Draft podcast. Not only are Ben and I on there every single week, but our buddy Greg Cosell, he joins me every single week. Dane Brugler, one of the best in the business. He is on there every single week, and I'm always rolling through a Rolodex of guests. We've got Matt Bowen from ESPN, who joins Greg every single week over on the NFL Matchup Show. Matt's going to come on to talk all about safeties, and a little bit of we've got some similarities. We've got some synergy there, right? We're talking about safeties today. We'll talk about them with Matt here on later this week on the Journey to the Draft podcast. One of many podcasts you should be subscribed to already. I'm going to give you another one. And this is if you're an Eagles fan, and I know there are a lot of non-Eagles fans that do listen to the show, but if you are an Eagles fan, make sure you go subscribe to the Eagles Update podcast, because I'll tell you what, it doesn't get any better than turning around and saying, hey, you know what? What's the latest Eagles news? I can get that. All you need to do is hit subscribe. Dave Spadaro, the Eagles Insider, he's going to give you short little bites, the latest, the up-to-date information, the new league year just around the corner. It's about to hit, right? So free agency, everything will be able to be official. Once all that stuff goes down, you can get it to your phone immediately. Thanks to Dave Spadaro, the Eagles Insider. Subscribe to the Eagles Update podcast. These are short little, just a couple of minutes every single episode, and you give you the absolute latest on your favorite NFL team, namely the Philadelphia Eagles. So enough about the Eagles Update podcast, enough about Journey to the Draft. Let's get things going right here with the Eagle Eye in the Sky. It's time now for Scouting Report with Ben Fennell.
Dim those lights. We're headed to the film room for the Scouting Report.
All right, let's get things going here on Scouting Report as I welcome in my friend Ben Fennell. Ben, we had a kind of an interesting task here this week. We talk every single year, I feel like, about these hybrid players, the positionless defenders, right? Those hybrid linebacker safety types. I introduced it a little bit earlier in the show, but what we did was we took a handful of the impact plays from Jeremy Chinn, the rookie second-round pick from the Carolina Panthers, and then the rookie linebacker safety from the New England Patriots, Kyle Duggar, who they took out of Lenore Rhine last year, if my memory serves correct. And what we did was we took a handful of weeks right in the middle of the season. So it was a handful of games. Jeremy Chinn was against the Falcons, Bears, Saints, and then the Falcons again. Duggar was against the Jets, the Ravens, the Texans, Cardinals, and Chargers. Basically, we took a handful of these plays. We took a look and just see how they were used. And so I'm excited to kind of dig into this because it'll be an interesting conversation. It's a topic we talk about a lot over on the Journey to the Draft podcast when we're trying to project these guys to the NFL. Chinn and Duggar were both very interesting projections a year ago. So interested to kind of get into this. And I guess that would be my first question is, going in, what were you most excited to see watching from these two players?
Well, two really interesting prospects in last year's draft class, both finding their way into the second round, surrounded by other safety prospects, whether it was Xavier McKinney at Alabama, Grant Delpit, Antoine Winfield. I feel like there was a really interesting kind of hopper of safeties to evaluate them against. But I was most excited to see alignment, usage, impact plays on the ball. And most importantly, their FBI and instincts as middle of the field players in the NFL, which offenses work 7 days a week during the season in attacking these players. So 2 players from Lenoir-Rhyne, Southern Illinois.
Yeah.
Not the, the Power 5 powerhouses that pump players into the NFL every season. Just want to see what the transitional learning curve was for these players that offenses work very hard to confuse, to prey on, and do attack on a week-to-week basis. And, being rookies from, kind of outside schools, just want to see what it was like.
And just to give people a little bit of a refresher, both these guys, as you mentioned, came from the lower levels, right? So one from FCS, I think Lenoir-Rhyne, I think they're D2. I don't think they're D3. I'm pretty sure it's a D2 school. But looking with both throughout the pre-draft process, yeah, they had good film, intriguing film. I wasn't in love with either, but you had the traits were certainly there. They go to the Senior Bowl. They perform well. The moment was not too big for them in either spot. Then they go to the Combine and blow the doors off the workout of the Combine. So you're starting to stack things on top of each other. Interesting. Both guys end up going on day 2 of this draft. And so I guess before we get into our takeaways from the film, give us your stat that matters. What was the one thing that that stands out to you from a pure numerical standpoint with both these players?
And just taking one step back further. Yeah. This second round, you had a player from Lenoir-Rhyne, Southern Illinois. You had kids from the Sun Belt and Robert Hunt from Louisiana.
Yep.
Play your game wherever you are. The NFL will find you. Whether you're FCS, as we're looking at another quarterback out of North Dakota State this class, and Trey Lance, just a few years after Carson Wentz. And we had a quarterback out of Wyoming make it very far into the playoffs this year. Play your game. D1, D2, FCS, NAIA. Play your game. The NFL will find you if you're a prospect. But anyways, moving on to these kids here. My stat that matters is really interesting reflection on how these two were used. Their line of scrimmage depth, Fran. Some of the most shallow of all the safeties in the NFL. Kyle Duggar, 5.3 yards from the line of scrimmage. Jeremy Chin, 5.6 yards from the line of scrimmage. The only other true safety in the NFL that had less depth was Adrian Phillips, who is coincidentally one of the teammates of Kyle Duggar at the New England Patriots. So really interesting to see how they were used. And when reflecting on some other rookie safeties, Julian Blackmon, 15 yards down the field. Wow. Antoine Winfield, 11 yards down the field. Jordan Fuller, really nice 6th-round pick to the Rams, over 10 yards from the line of scrimmage pre-snap. So where they're being used on the field, they're very much in the same boat. Well, you really have to kind of separate how they're used in the safeties versus other safeties. It's a very big hopper position.
So I guess my question real quick, and I don't want you to dive into too much into what we're going to talk about, but I feel like one of the things that everybody says now, we've been saying it for like a decade now, it seems like, oh, the box safety's dead. The box safeties don't exist. Well, we're looking at these guys that play within a handful of yards of the line of scrimmage. Clearly, they're spending a lot of time down where the action is. What does that mean for that trope, for that axiom? Oh, the box safety is dead.
Well, it's clearly not. And whether you want to call them a box safety, a dime linebacker, a sub will, whatever it is, the 8th man, down into the box, there's still a use for it.
Yep.
And I think it's just become much more hybrid and fluid from having segmented players of you're the box safety. You're the Mike linebacker. You're the will. I think there's much more fluidity with personnel, and you have to be able to wear a lot of different hats. And particularly these two defenses, when you're looking at how they use these defensive backs, dime or more. So that's 6 defensive backs, 7, 8. You want to play 11 out there, dime or more, 6 or more. New England was number 2.
Yep.
Carolina was number 3, trailing only the Green Bay Packers, who were number 1. So there are two teams that I did not expect this going in, to see two defenses with very similar deployment of sub-package defensive backs and how they use these 2 second-round rookie safeties. So there was some kind of interesting parallels that kind of just fell into while watching them.
Real quick, my stat actually was that all of those plays that we pulled from these guys, and it ended up being like 30 plus from each guy. So, roundabout, something like that. None of these plays came in base defense, every single one, nickel, dime, dollar, straight down the line. Like you said, 11 DBs, if you want, on the field. None of it. That does not mean that they did not play base, but I thought it was just kind of interesting that all the plays, basically what happens is when we pull these plays, They were all the tackles, the TFLs, the pass breakups, the interceptions, everything where they were the primary defender on the play to make contact with the football and lead to the stop. That was the play that got pulled. And so with all of these plays, all of them came from sub package, 100%.
And the one other stat and just kind of general point I took away, didn't watch a lot of Panthers or Patriots during the 2020 season. It just worked out that way. These are actually fairly decent defenses. Both top 10 in allowing fewest 10-yard plays. So they don't allow many chunk plays or fairly good tackling. They got their hands on a lot of interceptions, particularly the Patriots, a lot of turnovers, got after the quarterbacks. These are two teams that obviously didn't have the complementary football on the other side. Their offenses struggled throughout most of 2020. Defenses played from behind. But I was learning something about these two units and saying they actually played fairly competitive most of the season. Just didn't get a lot of help and points from the other side of the ball. So I just wanted to paint that full picture, and for different reasons. New England QB issues, Carolina didn't have Christian McCaffrey a lot of the year, X, Y, and Z. The defenses, though, I thought they were much better than I anticipated.
That's a good point. Let's get into now our 5 burning questions. And the first one, we're going to focus in on just the Carolina Panthers' Jeremy Chinn. Biggest takeaway watching Jeremy Chinn. I'll go first here. To me, it was just looking at his usage. And I feel like with all these guys, it's like, this guy could be a tight end matchup guy, man-to-man against the tight end. With Chinn, more often than not, again, in this sample of the plays that we pulled, a lot of what he was asked to do underneath zone coverage. He was a curl flat player, which is, essentially what you get from an outside linebacker. A weak side linebacker will buzz to the flat and he'll play basically along the sideline, close to the line of scrimmage. And that's where Chinn spent a large majority of his time on these cutups. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And just in terms of his usage, so much of it was zone coverage underneath. There were some where he was playing from depth. There were some where he was matched up on a back or something like that. But more often than not, underneath zone coverage and him having to try and get eyes on the quarterback and find the football.
Yeah, absolutely. I have that note zone coverage, but when peeling back some layers to how they use that zone coverage, Fran, it was pretty boring. Minimal disguise, minimal post-snap movement. He wasn't flying and buzzing to his landmarks and, it was very kind of a vanilla scheme, which is okay. There were some few sprinkles of man-to-man out there, matched up against Cordell Patterson outside the numbers, had a matchup or two against tight ends. But in particular, my biggest takeaway, Jeremy Chinn, is just how fluid he was as an athlete in space. Natural, fluid change of directions, under control all the time. Never felt like he was overrunning plays or off balance. And the other thing, just as a general middle of the field player safety, I thought he took really good pursuit angles.
Yes.
I thought he always kind of knew when to anticipate the upfield path versus being flat versus triggering downhill. And one other trait that I thought, the way he got ball carriers down to the ground, extremely long arms. You saw him use those arms to wrangle, sometimes a little too high, in my opinion, go after some shoulders and some arms. But like Inspector Gadget, like in kind of opening a robe, you just saw those arms engulf ball carriers. And sometimes I didn't think he was going to get a hand on a foot or be able to wrangle them. And he got there. So you definitely saw the length, the range, and just the fluid movements I really liked.
I thought of the two, he was definitely the more fluid and natural, kind of playing in reverse. The length was something. It's funny you said that. I wrote that down a handful of times watching both these guys, because both these guys, have pterodactyl type wingspans. Looking at Chinn, the thing that stood out, and then we'll just get to the second part here. The play that kind of best encapsulated, and I think it is interesting that you mentioned kind of a vanilla look defensively. I guess the one big thing to remember, a very young defense. Remember, they spent every single draft pick last year on the defensive side of the ball. So I wonder if they kind of had to keep things simple here. Year one, we'll see how they kind of expand on that moving to year 2 and year 3 with Phil Snow as the defensive coordinator. To me, the play that stood out, and I thought this was the best individual play either guy had made during this in this cut up, was the interception that Jeremy Chinn had against the Chicago Bears. And on this play, basically what he was asked to do is he once again, he was going to be that kind of buzz defender, that outside defender near the sideline. And what you saw from him, picking off Nick Foles against the Bears, first he's just going to reroute the tight end, then he buzzes out to the flat, reads the quarterback, and then you just see that fluidity, that natural ability to play in reverse, high point the football, makes the play, gets the interception. There was a throw behind him. Just an outstanding play, big time play from Jeremy Chinn here against the Chicago Bears. To me, that was the number one play. And again, it kind of just speaks to his comfort in coverage and just his ability to kind of play with range. And when we think of a safety playing with range, we think of the post player, the center fielder playing sideline to sideline. Here, he's playing as an underneath flat defender, and he's dropping back 15, 18 yards downfield and making a play. I thought that was a really, really impressive snap.
Yeah, I think that was his only turnover in this stretch of games we had watched, which I wanted to see some more impact plays on the ball, whether forced fumbles or maybe getting his hands on more balls in coverage. Didn't anticipate action like I wanted, but he's a rookie middle of the field player.
Yes,
and just like
right.
we started the show with, those were going to be some of my concerns. And I think you can help him a little bit with some pre-snap disguise and let him buzz and fly to some different areas and maybe shoot some passing lanes or confuse quarterbacks with his post-snap movement and use that length and athleticism. But the one play that illustrates my takeaway of just being a fluid, under control player, actually two in the Falcons game. Okay. There was one where he was on a slot blitz and the Falcons ran one of those zone flip plays where it starts like it's outside zone and he actually flips it to the perimeter right where that slot blitz came from. Yep. He had to put his foot in the ground, immediately say, whoa, blitz is off. I got to go chase the ball. Put his foot in the ground, took a great angle, ended up tackling the ball carrier for 4, 5, 6 yards. Later in the game, he's blitzing up the middle on 2nd and long. What do the Falcons do? A little jailbreak screen out to the slot receiver where the whole offensive line releases. He puts his IDs the play, foot in the ground, breaks laterally immediately. I think Russell Gage initially bobbled it, and then chin flashing right in front of his face, then made him officially drop it. But just 2 blitzes where he immediately had to read the play, change directions, change the plan on the play, and then go make a play. I just thought it was a great example of him kind of having one assignment, having to change it last second, and doing it very smooth, balanced, and comfortable.
Real quick, because I was curious as I was looking at, I think with these two guys, they're going to be constantly compared to Isaiah Simmons, because Isaiah Simmons was this kind of player coming out of Clemson last year. He ended up being a top 10 pick, didn't have a great season. You made that point about the amount of dime defense that these two teams played. So I was interested. I was like, I wonder how much dime Arizona played last year. According to the research I just did, and I just pulled it very quickly, and I want to double check it. You're better at this than I am. I only see 8 snaps of dime defense from the Cardinals last year. Heavy nickel, not as much dime. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. Just, again, getting back into the usage argument with these two guys. Dude, I completely agree. Those plays actually stood out to me a lot, with Jeremy Chin as well. And I think to me, the one thing, actually, I don't even want to say this because we're going to head back on this a little bit later. Let's get into Kyle Duggar. And to me, the biggest takeaway for me from him, dude, he is an outstanding tackler. He is a forceful striker. And I went back and reread my notes on him coming into this. And to me, we talk about this all the time. And I feel like this is really, really important for second level defenders, middle of the field defenders. If you're going to be a box safety, you have to play through contact. And there are a couple different ways you're playing through contact. Either that means navigating through traffic, defeating blocks from receivers and tight ends. But how about just getting a guy to the ground? Dude, Kyle Duggar was, never lost as a tackler. I mean, he was outstanding getting guys to the ground one-on-one. And it had me thinking, I know you and I talked about this back, last year. Daniel Jeremiah over on the Move the Sticks podcast, he had at one point, I believe it was last offseason, had shared a bunch of notes that he had from Bill Belichick when Belichick was in Cleveland. And it was basically like all of the things he looks for at every position. And it reminded me of, I feel like Belichick talked about this at the safety spot. And the number one thing that Bill Belichick listed in like his position manual in terms of what he looked for at safety. And just tell me if this sounds familiar when you're talking about Kyle Duggar. Tacklers, especially at safety, at least 200 pounds, speed 4.5, 4.6 range, don't need to be mental giants, but they have to be instinctive, size, speed guy, have to be able to cover man-to-man, 200 plus pound, 4.75 tough guy, can't play for us. He's got to be big, but he has to be able to play versus the pass. The traditional strong safety guy versus the run is not what we need. Former corners moved inside to safety might be ideal if they have size. Ball skills and judgment are essential, more so than pure speed and athleticism. Dude, how much of that could you say about Kyle Duggar, especially from in terms of the tackling standpoint and the coverage ability, the athleticism? This isn't like some big ogre out there playing safety. Another really athletic kid, but again, the tackling, the consistency coming downhill, I thought that showed up time and time again with Kyle Duggar.
And that was from his Cleveland days?
That was from his Cleveland days. So you're talking like a long time. That was the thing that DJ had said on the podcast, was like, dude, he like was so ahead of the curve in terms of being able to read where positions were going. But they're just awesome.
I mean, he could have wrote that last offseason and I would have been like, yeah, that's what we need today. That's exactly what I need out of my safety prospect. But Fran, the number one thing I've written down here, aside from where they use Kyle Duggar, tackles completely different than Jeremy Chin.
Definitely, 100%.
And like I just said, Jeremy Chin, good tackler, long arm, more of a wrangler, a little high at times.
Yep.
Kyle Duggar tackles with his chest, his hips, and his face.
He is a striker.
He puts his body and his core and his sternum on the chest of ball carriers. He does it in a completely different way. And some of my other takeaways of Kyle Duggar.
Yeah.
I thought he made more plays downhill. Yep. I thought he triggered a little bit quicker to get downhill. And I think his where he made a lot of those tackles were a lot more at the 2, 3, 4 yard range, while Jeremy Chin was a little bit more in the 7, 8, 9 yard range.
Yep.
But the downside with that is Duggar made less plays on the ball in coverage. I thought he did less things further than 10 yards down the field, less pursuit plays, less effort plays. So definitely different styles despite playing in a relatively similar area of the field.
So the fourth question, just the play that best illustrates that takeaway from Kyle Duggar. To me, there was a 3rd and long play against Baltimore where he just comes downhill and makes a tackle on an island in the flat as a curl flat player. So he's playing underneath, just like we talked about with Jeremy Chin. And it's 3rd and 7, so he rallies. He gets to the line, to the yardage marker for the first down, and then just rallies to the football and makes a stop one-on-one. And here's the thing. When we talk about tackling for safeties, the number one situation I'm looking for is we talk about making those stops in the alley. That's that area between, we'll say like the box and the sideline, basically between the hash and the numbers, where they're coming down and you are on an island. There's no one else around. You've got to be able to make that stop. Do you have the athleticism and the timing, the pace to be able to come down, break down, and then finish one-on-one? I thought Duggar did that consistently at Lenoir-Rhyne, and that showed up time and time again. That one, again, 3rd and long, he makes a stop in the flat, all by himself against Baltimore. I thought that was a big-time play, and just a good illustration of his ability to make those tackles on an island.
Yeah, a couple good tackles in that Baltimore game. We're going to go over to the Texans game and showing that triggering downhill on 1st and 10.
Oh, yes.
Had a 2-yard loss on Duke Johnson on kind of an inside zone duo play where Duke had to abandon the A gaps and go over to the B gap. And he's sitting right there, triggered in the B gap and rallied and wrangled that ball carrier in the backfield. A little slow to ID the play, but once he did, put his foot in the ground and got downhill. That was just a little something you didn't see often from Jeremy Chin, aside when he was on true blitzes.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at guys that can play linebacker, right? So, and that's so often we're talking about that with these kinds of players. It's like, oh, are they a safety or are they a linebacker? You need to see plays like that on film in college to say like, okay, he's got the ability to not just process what's happening with all the action that's going on around him. Because if you're lined up stacked, which he was on that play, you've got a lot. You're dealing with the offensive line. You're reading the keys, of the blockers to the quarterback to the running back. You're reading a lot there while handling everything that's going on, and then having the athleticism to trigger, get downhill, and finish. Whereas if you're a safety, seeing that from depth or seeing that from a slot position as an overhang player, that's a little bit of a different ask in terms of what you're doing mentally, what you're doing physically. So being able to see him do that, I thought was interesting in terms of trying to develop or trying to project what he could be down the road.
So if these players becoming this much, more popular around the league, sub package, dime, even more than dime, why don't we just call them will linebackers?
Yeah.
Why are they considered safety prospects to begin with? Why can't that will linebacker spot be a catch-all for these types of prospects?
To me, I still think that if you are a true linebacker, I need you. It goes back to the thing I was saying with Duggar, like you're going to be playing in the box more often than not. And I think with both of these players, they weren't necessarily asked to line up from a stacked position. And we didn't see often from these like 1st and 10 base personnel. Where are you playing? And so many of these plays happened in sub package. And again, that kind of speaks to it. We're not seeing the full picture here with what we saw from this cut up. But to me, if you're playing a true linebacker spot, you need to be able to see things from a stacked position, even though you're there are going to be times where you're flexed out and all that. When it's all said and done, 1st and 10, they're running the football. Where are you lined up and how are you processing the information that's put in front of you?
And that's kind of where the rubber hits the road there. Those early downs where offenses want to come out in 21, 12, 13 personnel, heavy, offensive sets and say, we dare you kind of thing to come out and dime, come out and, heavy sub-package defensive back personnel groupings. And it's guys like Kyle Duggar and Jeremy Chin that have to put on the hard hat and do some stuff at 215 pounds that typically 230-pound guys do.
I have a question for you. This is the last one. What was the trait that stood out most to you from these two guys shared collectively?
Well, it's just the toughness, the
100%.
physicality.
Dude, that's the number one thing.
The playing through contact.
Yep.
I mean,
100%.
when you're in the box there, you don't get to say, whoa, I'm a featherweight. This lineman blocking me is a heavyweight. We're not the same class here, folks. This isn't a fair boxing fight. I got news for you. Nobody cares. All right. These guys had to get off blocks of slot receivers, tight ends, tackles, interior offensive linemen, and you got to do it with a smile on your face. And both these guys, incredibly tough players, fighting through contact. I was really surprised with the number of blocks that Jeremy Chin got off of. Mm-hmm. Not only stacking, shedding, but sticking, avoiding, spitting off blocks, using every ounce of strength, athleticism, length to stay alive in the play. And obviously all that balance and footwork and just being a nimble athlete helps in combination. These guys got to be tough first and foremost. And there are going to be some mismatches. You got to keep swinging. You got to keep clawing. And I thought these guys did a really good job as rookies in the NFL.
The other aspect of that trait that you didn't hit on that I thought was really proud, especially with Chin, was the effort too. If you're a backside player, chasing the action. How many plays do we see from Jeremy Chin where, you talked about this earlier. He's making tackles, 13 yards downfield. He's making tackles 8, 9, 10 yards downfield because he's coming from the backside chasing it. And if he doesn't make that play, that's going to be an X play going the other way. And he did a nice job of making sure he was constantly around the football. Duggar made those plays a little bit more closer to the line of scrimmage. You saw some more of those TFLs. You saw, tackles in the box. But I think it was interesting. To me, competitive toughness, I thought that was one thing that showed up time and time again.
And one other note, just to really paint the full picture of 2020 and what they went through. Carolina Panthers, new defensive scheme, new defensive coordinator, new defensive play caller without Luke Kuechly at Shaq Thompson. You already mentioned rookies all over the place, from Derek Brown, Yetur Gross-Matos, and Bravion Roy. And then obviously Jeremy Chin being a crucial piece. New England Patriots, he had opt-outs all over the place, from Patrick Chung to Dante Hightower, cornerstone players of that defense that all of a sudden they had to pivot the last second. So I'm not willing to say that 2020 is a perfect snapshot of either of these teams or either of these players. But I thought they both handled a lot of adversity, had to kind of wear some hats. And I thought they put a really good kind of body of work out there to build off of moving forward. I'm just really excited to see where they go from here and building off of this.
So I guess there are two things that are topical. I feel like, with this, when you talk about these hybrid players, number one, there's a handful again in the NFL draft in this class. And we talk about that every single year. But, I guess at the top of that group this year would be a guy like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, right? From Notre Dame. A lot of people love, his skill set and what can he be there. And there are a handful, like I said, it's not just him, but watching these guys, did that move the needle at all for you one way or another in terms of kind of recalibrating what you need to be able to do to be that player and have success early on in the NFL?
Yes. And it's having players that are fluid athletes that can both play in phone booths and space. And I think that's what we're kind of talking about with this style of player, not just making him a true Mike box player, winning, between the tackles, and not a true open pastures space player. You have to be able to wear both hats. And I think that's what Owusu-Koramoah does so well. And who do you typically take off the field for the nickel? The Sam linebacker. That's why you call that position from an offensive perspective, the nickel Sam.
Yep.
Call him whatever you want to call him. That's where he's playing at the next level. So you could call him an outside linebacker, you call him a nickel, call him a Sam, call him a joker, an elephant, make up a funny term for all I care. That's the area of the field you're going to get the most out of him. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, that's a safety prospect, just like Jeremy Chin and Kyle Duggar.
So what separates someone like this, from because another guy who played that role was Eagles' now second-year linebacker, Davion Taylor. When he was at Colorado, was essentially a slot player, an overhang player. Now he's making the transition full-time to linebacker. And I would say more people felt that he was a true linebacker as opposed to playing as a safety. It's a developmental player for sure. But that's where it's kind of, where do you kind of toe that line when looking at these kinds of players that played essentially the same role? Like I look at Owusu-Koramoah and I say, man, I kind of feel like he's more safety than linebacker. But last year with Taylor, I was like, no, I think this guy's a linebacker, not a safety. For you, is there like a line in the sand that kind of delineates that for you and says like, yeah, like I feel that this guy on base downs, I said they're going to do some of the same things, but what separates that, that delineation for you?
Usually it's the athleticism in space.
Yeah.
That like, in just talking this draft, I think Talanoa Hufanga and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah are similar style players. But Hufanga, I think, lacks some athleticism that makes him that safety prospect. I think Hufanga is a great fit to be a true will linebacker at the next level and to truly convert like Adrian Phillips or Mark Barron or some of those other guys that really carved out true linebacker roles at the next level. Owusu-Koramoah, I think, is a much more fluid, explosive player in space that I think we get a lot more out of him. And that's kind of where I, draw that little differentiation about whether I call him an outside linebacker, call him a safety, call him a hybrid player, is usually the ability to play in space.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because I mean, like I said, we have this conversation every year. Miles Jack was one of them a few years ago. He's now a straight will linebacker, right? I mean, that's Miles Jack. And then you look at Jabril Peppers. He was that guy. He was a linebacker for Michigan. His final year there. Now he's a post safety. He's a pure safety for the New York Giants. And I just think that with all of these guys, Sua Cravens, right, was a second-round pick out of USC. He was a safety. Then he's just going to play in dime. He's going to be a linebacker. There are guys every single year that fit this kind of skill set and just how they project. And so much of that has to do with from the mental side too. And there's a lot that we don't necessarily get from film study, but I think it's really cool to just kind of be able to follow all these really interesting case studies. Isaiah Simmons last year, another great example of that as well, of course.
I feel like Richie Grant is the first name and image that came to my mind when you're reading the Belichick quotes about he could be 4.55, he could be 4.6. We need a tough player with good ball skills and that tackles really well. And I just think that's Richie Grant. He's not going to blaze us with his metrics or athletic profile or testing, but that was the kind of image of player I was thinking about.
Yeah, so for the people that don't know, he is a safety from Central Florida. We've been talking about him a lot over on the Journey to the Draft podcast. We just previewed the safety class. What was it, Ben? A couple weeks ago now, over on the Journey to the Draft. So I think when you're looking at all of these players, we'll continue to talk about the position as a whole here over on Eagle Eye in the Sky. But make sure you go check us out over on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Ben, as always, this was fun. This is a fun position to study and to discuss, and it's ever evolving. We'll continue having these chats every single year. But thanks once again for joining us here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. Great stuff from Ben, who you can follow on Twitter, just like I do, at @BenFennell_NFL. And while you're at it, I'm at Eagles XOs. That's where I post all the podcasts I'm a part of and all of our X's and O's content that we produce here at Eagles Entertainment. And you know how much I appreciate everyone that promotes this podcast on social media. That's one way to support the show, but the best way is to go on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. And I wanted to shout out today a couple of people who did exactly that. KC Izzy left a 5-star review saying, "Listen and learn. Fran and his guests really help you learn and understand things on a deeper level." KC, thanks so much for the comment. Thanks for the rating. Thanks for the support. Appreciate you and your listenership over the years. Jules Free, 18, also left a 5-star review saying, "Really enjoyed the episode with Chris Long. I really enjoyed the interviews with players and learn about how they trained, how they approach the game, and if they've got Eagles ties, that never hurts." Well, Jules, that is our goal. Every time we get a player on, every time we get a former player on, I want to dig a little bit deeper, peel the onion back a little bit, get into their process and how they viewed the position, how they got better as a player. What do they look for in young players when they get into the league? So we're always trying to do that. Thanks so much to both of you guys for your continued support. But thanks for the ratings. Thanks for the comments. Thanks so much to everybody out there for your continued support of this show and all the rest of our podcasts here at Eagles Entertainment. That being said, I think that'll do it. Another show in the books here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. For everybody here at the Duffy House, I am Fran Duffy. We will talk to you next week.
In just over 3 years, Eagles Autism Foundation has raised millions of dollars for autism research and care. But this is about so much more than just fundraising. This is about making a transformational difference in the lives of those affected by autism. This is about bringing our community together. With inclusive, sensory-friendly events and accessible resources, we meet families where they need us most and where we can serve them best. Together, we're united in our mission to improve the lives of the autism community and to turn awareness into action. It's what we focus on every day in every way.